Hi, everybody. I'm Sabina Toomey, the current Forestburgh town historian, and it's a September afternoon, uh, 2018. I'm sitting here with Hedy Scopino, who's a woman I've known for a long time, and I've asked her to come today to speak with us because she has a wealth of information about our town, especially the Cutterback area. The person who's filming this also has some historical placement in the town. He's the grandson of the McCormicks who lived on the McCormick farm on McCormick Road, and he's been kind enough to help with these video screenings, and it's been great working with him. So today I want you to meet Hedy Scopino, as I said. Hedy, I'm so glad you could come today. I know
glad.
you're a very busy lady. You've taken care of people all your life. That's how I've known you. I've known you as a wonderful person who was converted to Catholicism a number of years back at our little church here at St. Thomas Aquinas. And was it Father Ted that was
It was
the priest?
Father Schultz.
Father Schultz. Well, today I really want to ask you some questions about Burns Road and your granddad, and perhaps if you could let us know when he first came to the area.
Okay, the property that we owned was once McVicker's. There, my father I guess they came from Bridgeville, is where the Burnses came from, and my grandfather brought Burns Road, which was right in Oakland Valley, on this side of the Oakland Valley Bridge, and his relatives bought up at the top where the railroad station was, which is now Gelfman's and Hopkins. So Burns Road belonged to my grandmother, who turned it over to the town when she became a widow. She couldn't maintain it, so she turned it over to the town of Forestburgh on the condition that they maintain it. And my grandfather was working on one of the hotels, boarding houses, the roof, and he fell off and broke his neck, and that's why she became a widow, and they had a logging camp. In fact, she had a story where she dropped my aunt into a big pot of stew. Because she used to carry her around while she was cooking. But she also was the postmistress of Oakland Valley back then. And when my father, they went to the one-room schoolhouse in Oakland Valley, along with Arthur Case, Vince Galligan, my uncle Leslie, and my father.
When you say Vince Galligan, everybody knows we've got a long succession
This
of
is the
Vince
original
Galligan.
Vince.
So this would have been
The original Vince Galligan.
Vince Galligan. The
Michael
first.
Galligan was his
So to-
father.
Okay.
And then Vincent Galligan, my father, my uncle, and Arthur Case all went to this one-room schoolhouse, which in the end Arthur and Alice owned. Well, let's see. On this side of the bridge was all Cases. On the other side of the bridge was all Galligans, with a couple of us thrown in.
Couple
You
of the
know.
Burnses thrown in.
Yes.
Okay.
Now Galligans live on both sides because they've been here for so long and there's so many of them. And one brought up, the property, and that was that. It was Nancy Case by opposite Paradise who ran Paradise Road for Orange and Rockland. That's where we used to swim. And then there was no houses. It was all corn growing between hers and Bradley's. It's now Bradley's, which was Arthur and Alice's original house.
And currently, who lives in Arthur?
Well, now Sean Galligan lives
Yes,
in Arthur's
exactly.
new house. The original house was the one by the bridge.
Okay.
And nobody's living in it right now.
Is
But
there a house still there?
Yes. That's where the road comes to a dead end, opposite where Vinny lives. And there is a house right against the cliff.
Uh-huh.
And that was once Arthur and Alice's original house.
Do you have to go across the river to
Yes.
find it?
Yes.
That's why
But it's
I've
still
never
in
seen it.
Forestburgh. It's
Yes.
still in Forestburgh. And right now they close, when they took down the original Oakland Valley Bridge, they put a barrier up, and that's where we used to go swimming when everybody in the valley went swimming in the river there.
You said that she worked for Orange and Rockland. What did she-
Nancy Case lived right opposite Paradise Road. But what she did, she didn't work for Orange and Rockland. Orange and Rockland owned the land by the river. And she was the caretaker. So when people went swimming there, we had to pay 50 cents to go swimming there. But if you were a local child, she would give us back our money when we left. If you were up here for the summer, they kept the money. And they had dug out a spot down there 35 feet deep, so it was a big draw for people who wanted to swim with no rocks and it still is that way. I know, because my kids grew up there doing the same thing we grew up doing at that time. But when my father was here, he had to go to Port Jervis High School, which is now their middle school. And he had to board with Alice Bamberger, who was his cousin, who owns Hess's store in Port Jervis, while they built the Oakland Valley Road. And he told me that, of course, he couldn't get through to come home, so they boarded in Port Jervis, that they built the road on floaters because it was like quicksand. And they had a difficult time building that road. Where Vincent Galligan III lives now was a bridge that crossed the river. That is the original Oakland Valley Road that goes up to Schaefer's. It goes to the end and stops. That is the original main road. And then it would pick up past Troiano's, which is the yellow house, on the right-hand side before Galligan Road. And then it came down to the S-turn. It went up and down.
Sounds like it was a pretty
It was
rough road.
It was a one-lane road.
Yes.
I mean, there wasn't that many cars in those
Very
days.
rural.
Very
So
rural.
we have to be thankful that,
I wish it stayed that way, but that's beside the point.
well, the existing road and bridge now is quite safe.
Right,
So
well,
that's a good thing.
I brought the picture. The men that built the new road stayed in that Riverside house while they built the road.
Well, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, number one, Riverside House, to the best of my knowledge, was there when I came to the area. It was torn down, and the foundation is now a patio for Vincent Galligan III and his family. So if you're driving now, you can't see the house anymore, but you can see the foundation of where it was. I understood that that was quite a place, that it held 65, accommodated 65 people, and that it boasted that it had a slick oak dancing floor. That's what I know about the Riverside House. Can you tell us about some of the other existing bungalow colonies?
Oh, sure. There was also a third house on that property, the same, that looked exactly like the Riverside house. But that was taken down when the road was put through.
What was it called, do you know?
That road, that one I don't know the name of. I know the Riverside because that one was the one that we used to hang around on. We'd sit on the porches. We'd have beach parties down on the beach.
What
You
year
know,
was
fun.
that, Hedy?
Oh, I grew up here in the 40s and the 50s. So it was in the 50s that I was a teenager. And we used to get together, all the children of the different boarding houses and homes used to hang around together.
It was that particular boarding house. Do you know who it was owned by?
Yeah, Galligan's.
That's not the name that I have attached to
Well,
that house.
Helen and Ed lived in the house that Vinny the Third lives in now. The Riverside house was empty when I grew up.
Okay.
It was the only time there was anybody in there was when the men built the road, the new road. But when I grew up, Burns Road, it started right by Vinny the Third's house. It
So
went
it was
all
not,
the way
it was
back.
not an active boarding house. We're in
That
the 50s.
one wasn't, no. Go up the hill on the right was Ostrow's. That was a boarding house where I ran a day nursery. And I for the summer people that came up. Everybody had a room except the ones that had the one apartment. Up the hill from Galligan, well, across the way from Galligan's was Levine's, which was a very religious, the religious people would stay
Was
at
it
Levine's.
kosher?
Yes. And that was totally different from the rest because that was the only one that was kosher at that time. And there was people that was active when I grew up. Then you went up the hill and it was Ostrow's, which is now Schaefer's.
Mrs. Schaefer lives in that building.
Well,
that
she
was...
used to live in the big house, yes. She bought Ostrow's. Paul and Fran Schaefer bought Ostrow's. And when they bought it, the back room that is now their kitchen had nothing but stoves. Every boarding person had their own stove. Yeah,
Because it was kosher?
Well, that was kind of kosher. Yeah, most of these places were. They were all, owned by Jewish people. Levine's was definitely kosher. Ostrow's was kosher. Siegel's allowed a mixture because we all gathered there, and a lot of us weren't religious. A lot of us weren't. In fact, Pazzuli's was Italian. That was the only Italian up here. Now, there was Ostrow's, and across the street from Ostrow's, which Schaefer's bought, was Siegel's. And Siegel's had a store. And they would get food in for the boarders. And so they didn't have to go to town. Because most of the time the men were in here, they would drop their wives and the kids and they'd go back to work in the city. So they would have a store that had pinball machines and a jukebox, and it became a gathering place for the teenagers of my day. And then across the street was a Greenfields, and then that was a hotel that my mother came to when she first started coming up here. Yeah. Ostrow's was active. Greenfields was not. But Greenfields was where it was active in the 40s. And they had a casino to hold dances in the back by the woods. There was no road, remember? This road wasn't there. And they had the hotel, and then they had a casino. And they would hold barn dances and stuff in it. In fact, I've got the casino in my attic. The 2x10s are real 2x10s. My father and my husband demolished it with Vincent's permission and used that to build my kitchen. So it's a little uneven, because the real ones are not that big anymore. But that was active in my father's, days. My day, that was the only one closed, but they had the cutest bungalow in the front of the hotel that if you wanted your own little cabin, everything, it was a sunken living room and everything was up 2 steps. I loved that little bungalow. But then the next place was Sheriff's. And again, they had people coming, they had people staying. There was 3 bungalows besides the hotel and a casino. It was like the old time when they show these big homes and then you see a walkway and then there's... So that was active with us because we used to dance there in that casino.
So about how many hotels or inns or whatever?
There was Levine's, there was Sheriff's, there was Greenfields, and that became, and there was Siegel's, and there was Ostrow's. And then at the top was Pazzuli's, the only Italian in the area at the time. And that's where Ricky came to spend the summer, and that's how I met my husband.
Okay.
So, I was stuck up here, because when my father packed us up, it took us 8 hours to get up here. We sat on boxes. We had the 2 grandmothers with us, because the Burns grandmother came up with us, and they had the original foundation to the Burns house is still there. Vincent Galligan, the old one, when I say the old one, my father's age, used to feed all these hotels from the brook. He had the pipes run through into the brook.
You mean
and
he-
they got their water from the brook.
So he had a business, a water supply
guess.
business.
Because we
where
didn't. So
He provided water
yes,
for these.
for all these boarding houses and
That's interesting.
all the houses. The only trouble is when the flood hit or when anything hit and it was muddy, nobody had water. We had water.
Well, it's coming from the river.
It was coming right from the brook, not the river.
Excuse me, the
Yes.
brook.
It was, and that brook has pristine water in it. But I mean, we have grown up here. All the kids grew up here. My kids grew up here. We hung around. My father knew Buddy McCormick. You know, he knew Tom Toomey. These were all his, you know, but we didn't know as kids. I had no clue unless I went with my father, who lived in this end of Forestburgh.
Unfortunately, there is that kind of a situation that happens, and it's primarily because of the way the school districts are set up.
Well, we're like an annex. Everything we do is Orange County. We pay school taxes to Orange County. You know, through the town of Forestburgh. We get the Orange County Cutterbackville Fire Department. Our phones are from Orange County Exchange. We're like farmed out because there was such a distance between homes. You know, I mean, years ago, there was a home, an A home. There was no, 12,000 homes. So you could, I mean, Forestburgh was forest.
Yes.
And it was gorgeous. Then you went back to the city and it was a totally different life. But my father never left here. He might have lived in the city, but he never left here.
I can understand that.
Yeah, no,
Can you tell me when, as a young matron, you and your husband, Mr. Scopino, decided to come back to the old family homestead and make it your home?
Yes, my son was 4 years old. My daughter was followed home from school. She went to a Catholic school down in Yonkers. And she got followed home 2 days in a row. And we decided it wasn't safe anymore. And we came up here and moved into a summer bungalow. None of the places were insulated. But we would prefer that to the city.
Could you tell me about what year that was?
1969.
Wow.
We moved up here from 68 to 69. Every weekend we moved most of our stuff until the big stuff came one day. And we did it in a 1958 Rambler.
Oh, gosh, God bless you.
It lasted 3 years. We paid $300 for it, and that included the tires and the battery.
Wow.
But that was our first car.
Can you tell me something about, if you can remember, I heard you say that it took a long time to come up from the city on Route 17.
Oh.
Was there a lot of traffic on that road? What was that
Oh,
like?
yes. We would be stuck because we always did it Memorial Day.
Okay.
And we always did it Labor Day because we had to be in school the next day. We bought our clothes up here. We bought our shoes and robes in Port Jervis. We bought our clothes. We bought our school supplies. We didn't even... The next day we woke up, we went to school. But we would sit bumper to bumper. Every trip up and every trip back. We'd go through Sloatsburg and Monroe, all those little towns. And they would be sitting there laughing at us. They'd be on their balconies because they were enjoying their nice holidays. And we would be stuck in traffic.
I know this has nothing to do with Forestburgh, but it's part of the trip up that you're talking about. Did your family ever stop at a place called the Red Apple Rest?
That was our always stopping point.
Could you just talk a little bit about what that that little,
It
what would you
wasn't
call
little,
It
it
wasn't
was-
a diner.
It was a long building that had restrooms, and it had an outdoor quick ride up, get a hot dog, get a hamburger, something like the South Pole would have been in Middletown. But it was an elongated building where you could also go inside and eat.
But
And,
most of
and the
us,
buses stopped there. That's what it was. It was the bus stops, and across the way was their competition, the Orsic brothers. So it depended on which side of the road you were on. And it was on, coming
Route
up, it was on the
17.
right-hand side of 17. And Orsic brothers, you would go maybe from here to maybe the beginning of the road going out, and there would be their competition, the Orsic brothers, which again looked like the Riverside House.
well,
And it was where the buses, the short line stopped.
most of the people I talk about, and in my history of coming up to camp on Route 17, um, I don't ever remember Orsic House. Everybody always stopped at the Red
Oh,
Apple Rest.
that Red Apple Rest was
And the hot dogs were
great.
best.
It was like, well, it was a New York hot dog. It was basically like going to Coney Island. It was
exactly
that kind
it was
of
set
long.
up like that.
It was that kind of a long building. It wasn't just a square. And then they had the outside open place where they would serve people who, like an old fashioned skating rink type thing where you drive up. I think they call them Sonic now. Where
Yes.
you drive up and you know, for the 50s. But I mean, it was, when you reached that, you were finally out of the city and in the country.
I'd
And my
like
father loved it.
I'd like to let you know that in our library, in our town library, not the Ethel B. Crawford Library, I've placed a book that belongs to me, but it's all about the Red Apple Rest. And you can have access to that book. Just call Joanne or myself, and as long as you're a member of the town and we know where you live, you can come get it if you forget to get it back. But there has been a lovely book put together all about the Red Apple Rest, if anybody's interested.
When you live here, like say from the time you're 1, I really resented coming up here every summer when I was a teenager because I left all my friends to come up here. But then we had a group up here that we everybody got dragged their kids up here. So then we made our own little group. I was here the whole time.
Really?
It happened in August, and we had rain for 2 solid weeks. And of course, I'm surrounded by water on Burns Road. There's water that comes, the brook comes behind us. Now that brook
And you have the river in front of you.
and the river was on the side. And the river was right under the bridge. There were telephone poles and boats. Everything came floating down that river. That's how bad that river got. And that Riverside House, you'll see the watermark where the water came up. Now, when that was done, the brook was 2 inches below the property. That's as far as it came. We had to be in touch with the state police every 15 minutes. I used to go to the casino every night. We all used to go. And then one day my mother wouldn't let me go. And I was very mad at her because I had to stay home. And we heard this god-awful bang, and we thought my grandmother fell out of bed. And we went to check on her. It wasn't her. And when we went to go to the bathroom in the back of the house, I opened the door, and it was wall-to-wall mud. The mountain came down and crashed in the 2 back rooms. Took the 2 back rooms completely out.
Wow.
I mean, it was a mudslide. So my aunt and my uncle were up for 2 weeks, so I took the shortcut, which was by our lily pool, rather than go the long way. And I went down and I said, we have a problem. And I woke my uncle up. And when he came up, he says to me, Hedy, how did you come up? And I said, the shortcut, why? He says, because the road is gone. You would have been in the Delaware. The whole road up to my tree and the bridge, everything was gone. We sat, 2 weeks before that, I literally sat and watched the brook rip out the trees and take them with them. and I thought it was cool. I didn't own the property at the time.
Oh, you were a
Well,
kid.
I
That would
was
be cool to
14,
a kid.
15.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so neat sitting on that porch watching that thunder and that lightning and those trees go. My father, of course, was not that happy. So,
I wouldn't think
but
so.
then he was in the city at the time. And Ricky's father said to his mother, "We're leaving, says something's going to happen." He says, "This is not right." And they left the day before all this went down. So my husband was up here at the time just vacationing, and the father didn't trust it. But when my father heard, he came up and they wouldn't let him come through Cutterbackville, where the new post office was underwater.
That was the most impressive to me because I knew where it was. And it impressed me for a couple of reasons. One, there's absolutely nothing on that strip. It's all flooded. You can see a few telephone poles. There's no growth. There's no trees. It's like what had happened between then and now. It looks like a totally different place.
Oh yeah, well they raised the road after that. They rebuilt the road.
You can see that if
Yes.
you're looking at it.
Yes,
Yeah, that
they
you
they had to
mentioned
make it higher. It was like in a gully. And when my father got there, they wouldn't let him come through. And he turned around and he says, "I have a wife, 2 kids, and my mother-in-law, and they're stranded. I'm going." He opened up all 4 car doors, and he drove so that the water would run in and run out of the car to get through this flood. I got pictures of it. I don't know if you've got, or
There's
if they're in my
a picture
album.
of a car being
That's
towed.
my that's
car.
my uncle's. That was
Okay.
3 weeks after the flood. He couldn't get his car out because there was no bridge, and we are on an island. Burns Road was washed out, and the bridge was washed out.
Yes.
So we had to walk up through the woods, and come up behind where Pat lives now
Up to Galligan Road.
to Galligan Road.
Yeah.
And my
That's
father
up
had
the
to
mountain.
park up there. He had to park up there and walk through my grandmother could not do that. So they hooked a cable from our property to across the brook.
And Grandma went
they
across to the
attached a
cable?
boat to it. And the dog and my grandmother was taken out by boat across that little baby brook. That's how big the brook was.
Wow.
And the river was like an ocean. And Sedgwin was underwater. That's down in Port Jervis. That's how much water the camp down in Port Jervis was underwater and evacuated. I mean, it was not a fun time for the grown-ups. I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
So that's what was my outlook on that time until you see it now. We used to have the bakery come up once a week,
Wow.
to deliver cakes to the people up here. And he had 2 big long drawers the whole length of the truck. And he'd pull them out and we'd all have cakes. And
When did when did milkmen stop coming?
oh, he'd stop coming, I would say, in the 50s, the late 50s, early 60s.
Huh.
Because then there was no really milk company
He
here.
didn't come to this part of the town.
Ah.
No, he came to, well, because of the hotels, they got a lot of people. Well, my mother used to buy most of the cake. My mother was a sweet person. She brought, when the vegetable man came, and she brought every beet they owned. She brought all the corn. When she died, he stopped coming because she brought most of it. We had the bakery from Port Jervis come up with this truck. We had the milkman come up and deliver.
They called it the blouse man. On a certain day, the blouse man would come. He'd come with all different kinds of blouses. The ladies came out with their purses from their little bungalows because they had no transportation.
Right.
Once Daddy went home with the car, Mama was stuck there.
That's right.
So that was and now the big thing is that there's a kosher ice cream truck.
Oh, I didn't know
Do you
that.
see it? Do you ever see it on the road?
No. Well, down there, no. I doubt
Okay. Well, up at this part of the
it. We had the vegetable man would come, the local vegetable man, and he'd go to every boarding house, and then he'd go refill it.
If you wanted to make a comparison, you could call it like the Tinkers that traveled out west.
Yes.
The what?
On the
He wouldn't
Tinkers.
know
They
what
were
the
called
Tinkers are.
They were fellows who traveled out west in the prairie, and they brought pots and all kinds
Years
of stuff.
the
You
jewelry
had no store to
stores
go
used to do it.
Right.
My
Oh, now they
grandfather
do.
used to do jewelry. He used to take a valise of jewelry.
It's to be
And
done
he would
now.
go,
I have to show
yes.
you the stuff that they do. Wigs.
Because we live in the boonies, so they came. And anything that there was a place called Berman's in Cutterbackville that had everything. It was a hardware store. It was a food store for people that lived in Oakland Valley, rather than go all the way to Port Jervis or Monticello. You went there, and if you needed a certain screw, we always had it
Where was it?
right by the canal. Chot Post owned it in later years,
Oh, I know. where
right by the cemetery.
But that's in Orange County.
That's in Orange County, but
Right.
he did it. Berman did it. In fact, Berman had the store, and Sadie and High had the chicken farm where you went down and got eggs.
Okay, now there is
But that's in Orange County.
there's an existing building just before the road connects with
Yes.
209.
Yeah.
Is that the building?
That was the store.
You know, it looks like it could have been,
Yes.
and the DNA, and then there's an
And then they had
interesting-
rooms upstairs that if somebody had
there's
to
an
stay.
interest. I want to thank you so much, Hedy, for sharing all the things that you know about, and
Anytime.
the fact that you love Forestburgh is so visible. It's visible in the way you talk about it. It's visible in the way you interact with your neighbors. You're a caring, loving individual. You're kind to other seniors, and I'm very proud. I know.
It's the way I was raised. Thank you. And thank you.